Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and very good evening to all of you watching this presentation. I would like to first of all to thank Dr. Fauziah and her team in the Malaysian Women Coalition for Palestine, and I would like to stress that this kind of initiative is highly needed these days. We are about to enter a new phase of the Palestinian struggle, where Israel superimposes its fully fledged apartheid over the Palestinian territories. We have, for the last decades, been under Israeli occupation, but this is probably the first time in our struggle's history that Israel uses full backing and support from the superpower, the United States, to impose its illegal annexation and occupation over the Palestinians. So in order to highlight this, I would like to start by a brief historical overview to clarify that what is happening now in Palestine has its roots back in modern history. And what Israel claims to be its rights today is not its right. The root cause of our problem is the reason why Palestinians continue to resist occupation, and is the reason why Palestinians continue to demand justice. The Israeli occupation in Palestine started as early as the early 20th century, and it continues to haunt the Palestinians and to impose difficulties and restrictions on their daily lives. So we have a presentation that we will go through briefly. After this historical overview, I'll be inshallah highlighting the deal of the century and what it entails. The deal of the century is probably a very infamous and common terminology now in the Middle Eastern affairs. To many, it only deals with the Palestinian problem, but to me and to many Palestinians, it is much wider in scope. It is a deal or a plan or a proposal for a new regional outlook and a new situation in which Israel dominates not only the Palestinian land, but also the whole region. So in order to highlight this, let me start by introducing a little bit of presentation. I hope you can see my slides. Can you confirm to me that the slides are being presented on the screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. We are in this series, I believe, going to expose the dangers of normalization of relations with Israel. And in order to expose this deception, it is important to look at the background of the whole situation. So Israel is not normalizing or trying to normalize its ties with the region, with the Palestinians, with the Arabs and the Muslims and the rest of the world out of a sudden. It's an imperialist project that started as early as the 20th century. It continued to grow and expand like a cancer, and it today tries to normalize and legitimize its existence on Palestinian lands. So this series will highlight normalization efforts and counter normalization efforts. And today, in our introductory presentation or lecture, I'm going to highlight the deal of the century, which I believe is the grand design for the Middle East, the Palestinian issue included. So the deal of the century is a new plan that has been designed by the current American administration as well as the right-wing Israeli administration of Benjamin Netanyahu. Ever since President Trump has come to power, he has empowered his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and a team to work on a plan that will settle the issue and the problem in the Middle East, particularly the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And according to his very shallow understanding of world affairs, to have a business-like deal in which the Palestinians and the Israelis can both prosper economically is the best way out of the conflict. And therefore, he empowered Jared Kushner, who is an American Zionist, to work on such a proposal. And at the end of the day, this was the proposal that they came out with. You can see on the screen, Peace to Prosperity, a vision to improve the lives of the Palestinians and Israeli people. This is a long document which tries to suggest that everybody has failed to solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and Trump is the only leader capable of solving and resolving this long conflict. He completely ignores the international context and the international community. He completely discredits all the international efforts over the past decades to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and he completely undermines the Palestinian position and disregards the Palestinian feelings and the Palestinian aspirations through this so-called Peace to Prosperity plan, what Arab media and international media dubbed later as the deal of the century. So to President Trump, this would have been the best solution for everybody. But to Palestinians who were not present when this deal was announced, this deal basically compromises the very existence of the Palestinian people, and the dignity of the Palestinian people will be completely shattered. So through our presentation, as I mentioned, we will go through a very brief historical background and look at how the Palestinian land was, according to the United Nations, supposed to be partitioned and divided between the Arabs and the Jews, and how Nakba transformed the situation. Naksa later resulted in Israel occupying the rest of Palestinian lands in addition to some Arab lands, and how the deal of the century comes out of context to further complicate the situation, what the international response and the Palestinian response were over the past few months and years. So starting with a brief historical background, the Palestinian land has been under Ottoman rule for centuries. It started as early as the 16th century, when the Ottoman Empire took control of most of the lands in the Middle East. Palestine was a part of Greater Syria. It has for so many years been seen as geographically and historically as a contiguous part of Greater Syria. The cultural center, of course, of this region has always been the city of Jerusalem, the religious, cultural, and civilizational center. We have a map here of Palestine in the year 1851, where you see the vertical division of the territories of Palestine was not there. It was created later by the British mandate, the British occupation. The Palestinian territories and the Palestinian governorates were mostly horizontal, as you could see on this map. Palestine is one of the most ancient lands and civilizations. The Palestinians, the Arabs, and the ancient peoples developed one of the earliest towns in the surroundings of the city of Jericho. More than 10,000 years old settlements grew up around the city of Jericho. Later, few thousand years ago, Palestinians developed an urban or several urban settlements around the city of Jerusalem, the cities of Nablus, Hebron, and others. You see on this screen now a map of the United Nations partition plan on the left. The United Nations in 1947, after more than 30 years of British occupation, decided to resolve the conflict. The British gave up on finding a solution, and they handed over the problem to the United Nations, which was dominated by the United States. And the United Nations came out with a proposal which will divide Palestinian land and will give about about half of the Palestinian land to the new Jewish state, which did not exist back then, and will give another less important half to the Palestinian people. But Jerusalem was proposed to be an international city. Of course, the Israeli ethnic cleansing took place over the months after this partition was proposed in November 1947, and within 6 months Israel could take over the majority of the Palestinian land. It took more than what the United Nations proposed, and over 1 million Palestinian people became refugees. Now, since the start of the Israeli occupation, or what Palestinians call Nakba, millions of Palestinians have been tortured. You see here on the screen that over 1 million Palestinians have been detained by Israeli occupation in the years post 1967. Thousands were killed, thousands were deported, a lot of properties were confiscated, Palestinian rights were compromised and undermined, and the Jewish Zionist occupation has completely subjugated the Palestinian people. In 1967, Israel expanded its territories and annexed the West Bank, Gaza, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai Desert of Egypt. Now, the international community started to, of course, suggest that you either follow the partition plan of 1947, as seen on this map, or you follow the 242 United Nations Security Council resolution, which proposed that the Palestinians and Arabs get a state over the West Bank and Gaza, while Israel continue to exist on the rest of the Palestinian land. But Israel, benefiting from its superior power capabilities and the full backing of the United States, continued to act arrogantly and to seek to expand its territories. It did not stop there in 1967. Later in the late 1970s and early 1980s, it invaded southern Lebanon. And in the early 80s, in 1982, it announced the annexation of the city of Jerusalem, and it announced also the annexation of the Golan Heights. But the international community continued to reject this Israeli attempt. And the international community, especially the Western world, has always thought that we have given Israel and we have given the Zionist movement something, so the Palestinians should also get something in return. Although proportionately what the Palestinians were offered was very minimal and very much less than what the Zionist movement was offered, but this logic was always there. And international law today ratifies this logic. The idea that Palestinians should get a state alongside the Israeli state is well enshrined in international law. In fact, in 1947, when the partition plan was debated and proposed, the idea was to have 2 states, not only 1 Israeli state. But what happened is that the power of might, the Israeli military superiority, helped them and enabled them to take over as much land as they could. The Palestinians continued to resist and exist. And Palestinians in 1948 lands were completely undermined by Israel, but they continued to seek the protection of their identity. And Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza continued to struggle to maintain their own existence as well. After years of international efforts and years of deliberation, international conferences, Palestinian military resistance, diplomatic efforts, political resistance, as well as Arab involvement in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. After all these years comes President Trump with a very shallow understanding of international affairs and a very biased attitude towards the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and suggests a new proposal in which the Palestinians will get an archipelago of small Bantustans, small entities divided by Israeli military checkpoints and with no military at all, a demilitarized zone, with no control over borders, with no control over resources, water resources, or no control over proper strategic topography. and with complete dependence on Israeli mercy in terms of economy, international access, etc. So President Trump comes with this deal of the century, and you see the map that he tweeted and proposed. The Palestinians will get a small extension next to Gaza, which is an economic zone. The West Bank will be shattered and cut. The Jordan Valley will be granted to Israel over a silver platter. The Palestinian cities will become Bantustans, or small residential areas surrounded completely by Israeli military. And the name that they dubbed for this was the deal of the century. Now it sounds ridiculous to me as a Palestinian, because there is no deal. A deal is between two sides. But when you try to impose your own beliefs, your own narrow-minded ideology, and your own blinded vision, that's not a deal. That's an insult to the Palestinians, and that's political insult. The Germans, for instance, in the First World War, felt that they were defeated, and some certain conditions were imposed on them, and this resulted in them rising again, but unfortunately through an extremist leadership, and demanding more than what they were supposed to get earlier. Now that's the natural response that you can get when you impose unfair conditions on any nation. But what happened in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is that the Palestinians did not declare their defeat. What happened is that Israel, with the power of military, with the full American backing, thought that they have a historic moment where they can take over everything in Palestine and dictate the terms of the defeat over the Palestinians. But the Palestinians did not recognize or acknowledge that they were defeated. Palestinians continue to exist in the West Bank, in Gaza, in 1948 lands, and continue to resist. Palestinians continue to sacrifice everything they have in order to resurrect their own state, their own nation, and their own rights. The American plan, which was probably drafted by Jared Kushner, but which only fulfills the aspirations of the Israeli right wing, which has been ruling Israel since the year 2000. This plan and this proposal by the Americans will basically result in more conflicts in the region and will pressure the Palestinians to respond. Naturally, Palestinians facing this civilizational challenge will put all their efforts to respond and to reject this insulting deal. And the way Palestinians read this deal of the century is probably different from how the Americans and the Israelis see it, and from how many in the international community see it. The deal of the century entails three different sections, or three different portions. One is the economic portion, one is the political portion, and one is the cultural portion. The deal of the century is not only a result of an understanding or a vision for the Palestinian issue. As I see it, the deal of the century is a final grand design for the whole Middle East. The United States, over the past decade, has been exploiting the differences and the internal conflicts and rivalries within the Middle East, within the Arab world, and has been fueling these conflicts and disputes over the last 10 years. It has basically shattered countries like Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Sudan, and others. It has weakened its foreign policy in the region, has weakened countries like Egypt. It has created enmity between Gulf states. It has undermined the sovereignty of almost every Arab state, and it has put a lot of pressure on countries like Turkey and Iran. So after all of this turmoil in the Middle East, the Americans are coming with a grand design for the future Middle East. The Palestinian part is but a part of the deal of the century. You can name it anything else. The deal of the century, the grand design, the grand plan, Trump's proposal, whatever you give it, whatever name you give it. Let's look at the Middle East and Palestine from a very neutral perspective. You have a superpower which has its own foreign policy in the world, especially in its region and in the Middle East. The source of energy supplies not only for the United States but for China and for the rest of the world. You have peoples all over this region who feel that their national aspirations have not been fulfilled, whether they try to fulfill it through Arab nationalism, through political Islam, through socialism, through any other manifestation. These people feel that their national aspirations have not been fulfilled, and the foreign powers continue to undermine their existence and their aspirations. So what does the United States do in order to maintain its hegemony over this region? It supports and helps its own military base in the Middle East, which is Israel. Israel is to a certain extent an extension of the American imperialism in the world. It reflects how the American hegemony and superiority works in a region like the Middle East. The US feels probably uncomfortable with many of the regional political forces like Arab nationalism, political Islam, socialism, etc. So it seeks to continue its hegemony over the region by supporting and sponsoring the Israeli occupation, the Israeli project, this Western imperialist project in the Middle East. In the Americas, America has an absolute hegemony. It has almost an absolute hegemony over the Americas. It's the dominant power. In Asia Pacific, it has its fleets, it has its influence, its allies. In Europe, it's the same. In the Middle East, America operates with a feeling of insecurity. In order to dominate the Middle East, they have to support their own little ally, which is Israel. So they sponsor this Israeli occupation with military. We saw that Obama, for instance, endorsed a $38 billion deal of military aid to the Israeli government. They feel that the mess that has taken place over the last 10 years in the Middle East, where Arabs were killing Arabs, Muslims were killing Muslims, Middle Easterners were undermining each other, they feel that this has facilitated American dominance and Israeli dominance over the region. So they have been sponsoring Israeli occupation, and they have, to a lot of extent, been using Israel as the tool of their dominance over the region. Here comes the regional section of the deal of the century, or this grand design. The deal of the century basically entails that Israel is the political, economic, and cultural hegemon over the Middle East, representing the United States, of course. This is something that nobody in the region accepts. The Turks don't accept that, the Iranians, the Arabs, the Kurds, the Africans, nobody would feel comfortable that a foreign entity which was imposed over the region will become the hegemon over the region. But unfortunately, they have their own allies, they have their own collaborators within our own communities who would like to facilitate Israeli superiority. So they facilitate Israeli superiority on the cultural level by promoting normalization dramas, efforts, programs in the region. And if you have been following drama in the Arab world, there have been a lot of new movies and shows that promote Israel as a friend. They try to promote Israeli superiority through normalization of diplomatic and political ties as well on another level. Many, unfortunately, countries in the Muslim world have, in a way or another, opened lines of communications with Israel. And if a country rejects this communications with Israel, they try to impose a lot of pressure on this country. To some extent, they have also tried to promote Israel as an economic hegemon over the region. They have done that with the Palestinians through the Oslo Accords. Israel became the dominant economic power. Palestinians are cheap labor who have no option but to work in some Israeli projects. And now they are trying to do the same in the region through the greater Middle East. So this is the grand design that I see happening in the Middle East for the region. But how about the other section, the Palestinian section? The other section in the Palestinian territories and the Palestinian land is absolute hegemony over the Palestinians. Now Israel is uncomfortable with only ruling the Palestinian land. No, they want the whole region, they want the whole land with all the resources without people. So what to do? They started thinking of transfer. And if you look at the Israeli political discourse, the idea of transfer is one of the most terrible common ideas in Israeli community. They talk heavily about transfer. They try to promote Israel as the land of the Jewish people, and the Arab people who happen to live in Palestine for thousands of years should just disappear. They asked them to go to Jordan. They proposed that, okay, the Palestinian state is in Jordan, or the Palestinian state is only in Gaza, or in the Sinai, here or there. Yani, at the end of the day, they want to tell us that the Palestinian state is everywhere except in Palestine. This new move to annex the West Bank or the Jordan Valley is only a legitimization of the Israeli occupation. The Israeli deal of the century or grand design for Palestine has been taking place for so many years. Since 1967, Israel has been expanding its military posts, its settlements, its residential areas within Palestinian lands in the West Bank and Gaza. Later, they left Gaza, but they continued in the West Bank. Ever since the Oslo Accord was signed in the 90s, Israeli number of settlers expanded. You have now almost 750,000 Israeli settlers living inside the West Bank. So you have almost 1 million Israelis living inside the West Bank and controlling huge territories of the West Bank, especially agricultural areas and mountainous areas. So what they're moving forward with now is something that has been taking place for 10 years. It's not a new plan. It's something that they have been working on, creating reality, as they call it, the reality on the ground. But now they need international legitimacy. It's unfortunate that we are living in a time where the United States has one of the most terrible leaders who has endorsed the right-wing white supremacists agendas, not only in the United States, but also internationally, who is giving the Zionist lobby and the right-wing Jewish and Zionist leaders full delegation and full authority to expand and to carry on with their regional and international plans. When he was sworn in as president, one of the earliest press conferences captured him saying that, I don't mind, you can have 2 states, 1 state, whatever you feel comfortable with. So he actually does not mind what the Zionist lobby wants. He does not mind what Netanyahu and the right-wing Israeli leadership wants, as long as it satisfies their aspirations. Of course, his damage has been done to the US itself. Now he has raised the environment of hatred and enmity and polarization within American society itself, to the extent that the Black Americans feel marginalized in their own land. And we've seen how they treated one of the national institutions, the police, how they treated George Floyd, and how they continue to treat the American protesters who demand justice for George Floyd. So the same mentality is actually empowering the right wing in Israel to annex the rest of the Palestinian lands. So when we talk about the deal of the century, we're talking about 2 sections, one for the region, one for the Palestinian land, and we are talking about 3 levels. One is a cultural level, one is an economic level, one is a political level. They thought that by sponsoring the Palestinian economic zones here and there, they can kill off Palestinian national determination, national aspirations. And they thought that by allowing us to raise our flag in disconnected areas without real sovereignty, we would stop demanding our freedom. So the deal of the century is basically setting the stage for a complete Israeli superiority over the Palestinians, the Arabs, and the whole region. This has to be stopped. Now, the Palestinians are playing their role. The Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank in 1948 territories in the diaspora are doing their best, but they are not empowered to liberate their lands. They don't have enough capacity and capabilities to end Israeli brutalities and Israeli measures. They don't have the needed power to achieve such, hopes. But if the international community comes into their aid, things would be much different. It is very unfortunate that our region is shattered. Our Arab neighbors are either under huge pressure or undergoing internal turmoil or implicitly working with the Israeli agenda. It's very unfortunate that the international community now is also facing a tough time through the COVID pandemic, whether on the health level or on the economic level or later on the political level. The whole world feels that there are other priorities, so the Palestinian people are left alone to defend what remains of their land. Now, how has the international response been? Everybody in the international community has been talking about international law, international norms. What Israel is doing is that it is annexing another people's territory. It's against international law. The international community should put sanctions on Israel, just like they did on Russia when it annexed Crimea. But the international will is so weak. It's not potent enough. Yes, the United Nations Secretary General issued a statement recently condemning the Israeli plan. The European Union issued a statement. Many Muslim countries, including Malaysia, issued statements. But that is not enough. A huge efforts should be put to end Israeli domination over the Palestinians. We have lived through decades of Israeli humiliation, Israeli dominance, Israeli war crimes, Israeli violation of international law, and this has to come to an end. The Palestinian stand is very clear. As these pictures in this slide show you, the Palestinians have been doing their best to resist Israeli occupation. The Great Return Marches, for instance, which have been taking place in Gaza for so many years, demand the return to our homeland and demand an end to the siege on Gaza. The Palestinian, small-scale intifadas which take place in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. Every now and then, a young Palestinian confronts an Israeli soldier and tries to express the feelings and the sentiments of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian political leadership, whether be it Hamas, Fatah, Islamic Jihad, Popular Front, Democratic Front, etc., has been expressing our concern, and we have been politically divided on many issues except the rejection of the deal of the century. The Palestinians of all political backgrounds are protesting and rejecting the deal of the century. They are willing to work together to undermine this deal of the century. The Palestinian national institutions are trying their best to block and object this deal of the century. But as we say in Arabic, one hand alone cannot clap. You need another hand. You need the aid and the support and the help of the international community. We need the help of the Arab world. We need the help of the Arab League. We need the help of the Muslim world. We need the help of the OIC. We need the help of the United Nations, the international community. And if the international community does not come to our help and to our aid, this will not stop us as Palestinians from resisting and from trying our best to liberate our own lands. But it's going to come at a huge cost. The Palestinians have sacrificed a lot. If the international community does not come in to aid them, they will have more casualties, more losses, more sacrifices. I really hope that the international community, the Arab, Muslim friends of Palestine will take it seriously and come to aid the Palestinians. Such initiatives like this webinar and this effort by the Women Coalition are highly needed. I really salute each and every individual who has put an effort in working on promoting the Palestinian issue, because to take action you need to be aware and you need to feel with the people of Palestine. So it comes at different levels. We need the sentiments and the feelings, we need the action of people, but all of this can happen only when there is awareness and understanding of this struggle and of this conflict and of this problem. The world's becoming more aware of what is happening. The social media revolution, although to a limited extent, has helped us. The revolution in technology, which helped in connecting people, and the advancement in communications has helped the Palestinians to voice out their concerns. Now, when Israeli soldiers brutally murder a young Palestinian man or woman at a checkpoint, everybody in the world will be able to know. Recently, yesterday, the Israeli military forces, the Israeli occupation forces, shot dead a Palestinian young man at the container checkpoint. He was from the city, from East Jerusalem, from Abu Dis. Ahmad Iriqat was a young man heading to pick up his sister from the salon to go to her wedding. They shot him dead, and they started to release some footage to claim that he was attacking us, blah, blah, blah. The Israeli checkpoints should not exist in the first place. Israeli occupation of Jerusalem should not exist in the first place. And Israeli humiliation of the Palestinians should not exist in the first place. This young Palestinian is not the first and won't be the last. Over the past few days, I'm sure you have been following the news. Every now and then there is a young Palestinian who is being shot dead at a checkpoint, or who is being captured by the Israeli soldiers, who is being abducted by the Israeli authorities. We're not talking only about individuals, we're even talking about members of parliament, Palestinian members of parliament being abducted by Israeli authorities. We're talking about Palestinian ministers. Two Palestinian ministers were killed by Israeli authorities. One shot dead during a protest or an unarmed demonstration near Ramallah, and the other was bombarded in his home in Gaza. We're talking about a brutal occupation which does not respect human life. We're talking about an arrogant power which believes in the might of power, not in the might of right, and which tries to impose its occupation over others just because it has the power to do so, and because it believes in some superstitions and some extremist ideologies. This has to end. This has to come to an end. We have to all put an effort to do so, and inshallah our freedom will be seen soon with the efforts of each and every individual in this world. I really appreciate and thank Dr. Fauziah and her team for the invitation to this webinar, and I really hope that these efforts will continue, and more substantial support for the Palestinians will come from all corners and quarters in the time coming, inshallah. Thank you so much, Dr. Fauziah, for having me, and thank you to all the friends who have been watching this streaming.
Thank you, Brother Muslim. It was a very comprehensive overview, and also really looking at just not a Palestinian issue, but rather a Middle East issue, and also a US superpower with his little Israel as their military base to overlook over the Middle East areas. Any questions, Shu? Anybody pose any questions?
No, so far we don't have any questions at Facebook Live.
Okay, if I just like to ask Brother Imran.
Yeah.
We have seen so many. I mean, I myself was captured by the Israeli army, so I know how the humiliation that they put on you, and they pressurize you to do things that you do not want to do. I think I'm just feeling a minute pressure from them if we compare from what the Palestinian has to go every day at the checkpoints, in their house, every day. How actually do you think we can stop this deal of century? Anyway, this is not a deal because you were not consulted, the Palestinians are not consulted. So how it is a one-sided deal of the century? How can we stop this century?
I totally agree with you, Doctor, that this is not a deal. A deal is between two partners. And when one side is completely ignored during the drafting of the deal, during the consultations on the deal, and during the announcement of the deal, that makes it no deal. That is a plan or a design for a certain end from different powers. But the Palestinians are not part of this deal, and the Arabs and the Muslims, the people in the Middle East in particular, are not partners in this deal. They are being subjected to American foreign policy adventures. Since the start of the year 2020, American foreign policy adventures have not ended in the Middle East. The announcement of the deal of the century, the assassination of the Iranian military general, the continuous blind support for the Israelis, their policies in Syria, in Iraq, etc. The American adventures in the world, and particularly in the Middle East, are not deals. This is a very powerful army and superpower imposing its terms on everybody else. But I would like to remind this power of what happened to other powers in the past. The Athenians, as early as the Greek history, the Athenians felt so powerful and they sent their troops to invade Cyprus and to invade some islands in the Mediterranean. It resulted in them losing the war to other Greek police or cities. The Soviets felt so powerful, they invaded Afghanistan. Where is the Soviet Union now? The Germans felt so powerful, they annexed Poland, they annexed many European territories. Where is their might now? So the Americans are actually misusing their power. They're making big mistakes, whether by occupying Iraq and their adventures in their foreign policy, or by supporting their military base in the Middle East, which is Israel. They're committing big mistakes. But now, what can be done to stop this? I believe that the efforts that each and every activist puts counts. What you've done, Doctor, when you visited Palestine, when you went on this women boat, is to show that the whole Malaysian society that a Malaysian woman actually has the guts to go and protest Israeli policies and to support and show solidarity to the Palestinian people and the Palestinian resistance. So this is a game changer. Within the local context here, everybody who has followed the news realizes that, oh, we can do something to end the agony in Palestine, to end this misery. Individual activists can do a lot. Organizations can do a lot. And a big number of Malaysian organizations over the past decade has contributed huge efforts and contributions to Palestine and to the Palestinian people on the charity level, on the economic empowerment level, on the education level, etc. What we need is more advocacy. Maybe on the state level, on the official level, we keep on demanding our leaders all over the OIC member states and across the international community in the United Nations, we continue to demand these leaders to do something. And yesterday, 1,080 members of parliament from all over the European Union issued a strong ultimatum or statement condemning the Israeli policy and demanding from their European leaders to take action by boycotting Israel, by sanctions on Israel. There are a lot of official efforts. The Malaysian Wisma Putra has been very active in different levels and on different platforms. The Indonesian foreign minister yesterday was lobbying the whole ASEAN to condemn this annexation. Turkey, President Erdogan was very clear and direct in his condemnation of this plan. Many of the Arab states have been very clear in their protests, although some were shy, but but their position is clear. The official level is clear. We don't accept this Israeli-American plan, but most of these countries don't have enough power to continue to voice out our concern and their concern. So what we can do is to move on to the next level. We as activists, as NGOs, as public, as people of this world, we can do a lot on the civil society level, on the economic level, and on the individual level. On the economic level, we have to really push for real boycott of the Israeli products and the Israeli institutions. Real boycott, economic, cultural, and political. Don't welcome Israeli athletes in your countries. This is what Malaysia did once. Don't welcome Israeli professors to your universities. Don't welcome Israeli participants in your programs. Don't trade with Israel. Don't buy or sell to Israel. Just like what has happened to South Africa, we have to pressure Israel. This is what should be done on the popular level, on the public level. This does not need governments to do. This needs individuals to do. And we have to create more awareness to achieve that.
I think there is one question, Shu. There is two questions.
Yeah.
Can you read it or you want me to read it?
Yes, I think on Facebook, right? UN Resolution 242 and Resolution 338 reiterate the importance of both sides to negotiate with the aims of achieving a just and durable peace. Was USA supposed to be the mediator? Are we seeing the process happening? Instead, a new deal is on the way. I mean, this question or comment from Sister Noor Azian is telling it clearly. The international community was expecting both sides to negotiate. The Palestinians have put all their efforts in finding a peaceful settlement. What have they got after 2-3 decades of negotiations? Nothing. We are basically losing what we had when we started the negotiations. We were the weaker side, but we were still living in those Palestinian territories. And now, after 3 decades of negotiations, Israel is annexing our land and is seeking international recognition of its annexation, and it's forcing us out of our land. So Palestinians are open to all options. We've never been, narrow-minded to say, no, we're only going to do it this way. We have been open to so many options, but we are the weaker side. That's why Israel and the US and the world we live in does not really give much attention to us because we are the weaker side. It's not because Israel has any rights over Palestine. Israel has 0 rights over Palestine. The superstitions that were the basis of the Zionist dreams are nothing. They are superstitions, and they have no right over Palestine. But we have been open to all kinds of resolutions. That's why we tried military resistance, diplomatic negotiations, political solutions, unarmed resistance. We've been trying everything, but we are the weaker side. And that's why the arrogant, strong Israeli occupation doesn't care much about what we do. So it's not a matter of negotiations. It's a matter of military might being imposed on the weaker side. But this, in the long run, does not work because it didn't work for the French in Algeria. It did not work for the Americans in Vietnam. It did not work for any colonial power in most of this world. You are strong today, but you are weak tomorrow. You can be strong for 10 years, for 20 years, but you're going to become weaker. The British Empire used to rule 1/4 of the world. They used to rule 1/4 of the world population and world territory. Where is Britain now? It's still called Great Britain, but it's an ailing economy. In fact, few years ago, Scotland was about to exit. It's shrinking. You could be strong today, but you're not going to be strong forever. So Israel is actually blinded by its military might. If they think logically, their future is not by imposing solutions on us. Their future is by listening to us, acknowledging our suffering, acknowledging Nakba, trying to find a solution after recognizing our existence and our rights. But they're not doing that. I see another question, Doctor.
Yes, please.
From Sister Fitria. How to make world really notice about this annexation issues so they really want to act to stop Israel. This effort is one. This program, this webinar is a clear effort to try to draw attention to what is happening. Official and public activities should continue. I really salute the Malaysian king for issuing a statement a few days ago condemning the Israeli annexation. This brings everybody's attention, and he called for Salat Hajat in all over Malaysian mosques. For the foreign ministry issued a statement. I hope that each and every political party will issue a statement. Many Malaysian NGOs have issued statements over the past few weeks condemning this annexation plan. This should be done on the ASEAN level and on the international level, because I understand everybody has his own problems. Every country has its own problems. We look in this region, for instance, Philippines and Indonesia are having hard times with COVID, with coronavirus. We look internationally, Brazil, the US itself, many European countries are having tough times with this coronavirus. So everybody has his own problems, economic problems sometimes, political, sometimes even security problems. But if we draw everybody's attention to our struggle, the minimum we can achieve is that this Israeli settlement will not work. We might not overturn things and end occupation. That might not work with all these media activities. But awareness can help us continue to delay Israeli success. If they take over and nobody knows about it, they succeeded. Just like what happened to North America. The white settlers took over North America. They wiped out the Red Indian population. Nobody knew about it, and they continued. Now it's a new nation. History could have been, different had the international community knew about what was happening over there. We have to create awareness. We have to really work hard to create awareness. Everyone has his or her engagements, but what we can do is to alert people about what's happening. This is not the job of Palestinians alone. Palestinians are paying with their blood, sweat, properties. I really hope that our friends and allies everywhere, like what you're doing, Dr. Fauziah, and your colleagues in Rose to Rose, in Women Coalition, in My Care, in all other Malaysian NGOs, this is needed. If the activists worldwide take action, things will be different, people will be more aware, and we will think together of solutions. Because the Palestinians are expected to fight, to resist, to exist, and to think about solutions. It's too much to expect from us after so many decades of occupation. The fatigue is really huge. You know, since the year 2000, we've been through a 6-year tough intifada. Thousands were killed. We've been through the first Gaza war, the second Gaza war, the third Gaza war. We've been through the Great Return March. We've been through the Al-Aqsa uprising in the last 4 or 5 years. It's huge. And yes, the fatigue is really taking us, but our aspirations are still high. Our spirit is still there. So kalau tengok semangat rakyat Palestin, masih alhamdulillah okay. Kita walaupun dah banyak sacrifice, banyak korbanan, tapi semangat kita masih ada untuk merdeka, insyaAllah. One day we will get our freedom. It's going to take time though. So we need everybody to help us on this, work with us, think with us, support us by all means possible.
Inshallah. Any more questions?
There's no more question.
Yeah. Okay. Have you actually give the question, the quiz questions?
No, now. So the participants will see in our slides now. So to all participants, so again, this lecture was actually sponsored, or the Zoom was actually sponsored by Imran from NGO from Malaysia. And our moderator was actually the chairperson of Malaysian Women's Coalition, and our speaker is Brother Muslim Imran. So for this quiz, you will see the question here, but please write your answer at a Facebook comment, and we will contact you if you are the winner. We will contact you after this event. And again, the prize is actually stated down at the comment. We're gonna give there's 3 questions, so we're gonna give 50 ringgit or 165,000 rupiah or 361 Thai baht. So, Fauziah, please, this is the first question.
What is the date of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people? Next question, maybe.
There's a lagging of like 30 seconds, so we need to give the viewers to see the question. Okay, now the question is already in Facebook.
Yeah.
And so please put your answer in the comment and we will get back to you. So we will move to the second question.
Maybe you can put the first question as well and then just add the second question.
Alamak, next slide.
Tak apa. What do the Palestinians call the 1948 war with Israel and what does it mean in English? Ni senang ni.
This is easier.
This one easy. The first one a bit difficult.
Yang pertama pun, I give a hint. Yang pertama pun senang. It coincides with the day the United Nations voted to partition Palestine.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we already have a winner for the first answer. Actually, a few people already know the dates. Alhamdulillah. So now they are actually reading the second questions. So we will wait for the answer at the comment. So Brother Imran already mentioned it a few times. So you just write down what is the Arabic name and what does it mean in English. So we proceed for the third question, Fauziah.
Yeah, name 3 Palestinian national resistance groups that you know. He mentioned in his lecture.
I mentioned many of them.
Yeah.
At least 5. I mentioned at least 5.
Yes.
At least 5. Okay. For me, this is quite a hard question.
No,
because we only know 2, the F and the H. So the other one will be a bonus for everyone who knows. Yeah. So please answer at least 3. So or just put the 3 names simultaneously. And
the correct answer must have 3.
I
think
you should be lenient. 2 out of 3 pun boleh.
Senang ni, boleh.
Okay, so everyone already answered at Facebook.
Masya-Allah. So can we get the winner's name?
Review sebentar.
The decision is final because they have dates, time, and whether you get it. The fastest and the most accurate will win, inshallah.
Okay. So the first for the first question, the winner is actually Shida Shukri. That's answer only 1 minute from Ahmad Abu Aish. So actually 2 people answered very fast, but the first winner is actually Shida Shukri. So Shida Shukri, we will contact you after this. So for the second question, it actually goes to Ahmad Abu Aish, Nakbah or catastrophe.
Tahniah Ahmad.
And the last one, oh my, this one, a lot of people are giving only one answer or 2 answers at one time. But
anybody give 3?
Yeah, according to the timestamp, the one that give 3 is actually Fitriya Fadilah.
If many people give 3 answers, take the one that gives 4.
Okay, so Fitriya Fadilah answer Hamas, Fatah, the H and the F, and Jihad Islami.
MashaAllah, Islamic Jihad.
Islamic Jihad. Okay. So.
Okay. Alhamdulillah, I think people are listening attentively to you and we get a lot of information and we get the emotions of it. We hope with this awareness lecture, it will actually spark off more activities and more spread of this awareness in the Palestinian issues. And inshallah, the success or liberation of Palestinian will be soon, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan, brother Muslim, for this very beneficial lecture that you have given us. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And thank you to all the viewers and all people who support this program. Don't forget, next month, 4th Thursday of the month, the topic will be media bias. by Lauren Booth, inshallah.
Okay, thank you so much. We're gonna go offline in 3, 2, 1.
Okay.